Board on the. All right. Let's see, so I will. Okay, sure.
Okay, I think we are in business. Hi,
All right.
hi Brian, good morning.
Good, very good. Good morning, Peter, and good
for
morning,
coming.
everyone. I'm happy to be here today. I've met some of you before. I'm Brian Smith, and I am a real estate attorney, usually defending real estate agents like agents in your office, similar brokerages, and advising buyers and sellers on issues that come up in a transaction. And I'm here today to give you some tips, some practical advice on how to not have to deal with lawyers, not have to deal with legal problems in your transactions, tell you about situations that I've seen come up in cases that I've handled, talk about some forms, talk about how you should be advising your clients, and then hopefully this will help your transactions go smoothly and keep you earning commission and out of the lawyer's office. And I've got an outline which you all received, and I have it here on the computer. I'm going to screen share it also. All right, just give me 1 second. I'll get it up on the screen. And so you can follow along on screen share or with the copy that you have. I'll try to stay with the outline, but I'll be, telling you just generally about examples in cases that I've seen come up. So here is the outline, and hopefully you can see it on your screen. And okay, so I will start out on page 1. And so, as a real estate agent, the first thing I want you to keep in mind is what I call staying in your lane, meaning that as the real estate agent, you're not advising on structural integrity of a home, meaning you're not a contractor, not advising on how to draft amendments to the purchase agreement. That really gets into things that real estate attorneys do. Also, the limit on your license is that you're not being a sales agent is not the same as a property manager. It's also usually in your independent contractor agreement, there may be a paragraph that says that you're not supposed to be handling property management. So being aware of what is really a sales function and then what gets into, other related areas that are really not in your lane as an agent representing a seller or a buyer here. One interesting thing I'll raise with you that I see when there's cases and real estate agents are providing their file to me, they're providing their emails with their seller, their emails with the buyer, their emails with the other real estate agent. I've seen situations where actually, so the signature block in your email, that's the first place to start with acting within the scope of your license and your competency. So let's say, for example, that you're a real estate agent and you are also licensed as a general contractor. Your signature block at Coldwell Banker George Realty, it should say, real estate agent at Coldwell Banker George Realty, serving the San Gabriel Valley for, 15 years, or how many years you've been an agent. But it gets into a gray area of potentially issues and what your clients are going to think if your signature block says real estate agent, also general contractor, and it has a link to a website for your company that you also operate as a general contractor. It's good from a business point of view is that your clients are going to be impressed, but the concern that I would have is that when you're buying that house and there's cracks in the foundation, you make a comment to them of, well, those cracks are minor, they can be easily repaired. They think that they're getting a contractor's opinion in addition to a real estate agent's opinion because they saw your signature block and it says real estate agent Coldwell Banker George Realty Alhambra. And then next to it has a link to, Smith General Contracting, also licensed as a contractor. So at that real simple level, here's a tip for you. If you feel the temptation to put something else in your signature block about, maybe you're also a CPA, talk with Peter about that. Because those are the issues that can cause a buyer to think that you're really more than the sales agent for them on this property. And that's not a bad thing, but it gets into a gray area of what's really your role. The other thing that I see in the way agents are just very simply in their emails of how they present themselves is that as you're an agent, and your license is under a brokerage, that's Coldwell Banker George Realty. Some of the agents, I see this in, some of the offices, not necessarily in this one, but they have what they call a team in the office. So if I'm the agent, I say I'm the Smith team in Coldwell Banker George Realty, if I have my flyers or I have my signature block and it says Brian Smith real estate agent, and it says in big bold capital letters the Smith team, it creates the impression that you are your own broker. And that's really not the way the legal framework and the Department of Real Estate regulations are structured, is that you are working under a brokerage. So just be careful that your marketing materials, your signature block, don't create the impression to the recipient, to the reader, that you are your own brokerage. I can say Brian Smith real estate agent, the Smith team, but I need to say next to that Coldwell Banker George Realty. Maybe you have Coldwell Banker George Realty in a little bigger font, and then next to that, the Smith team. In getting into your transactions, I have here on the outline. So say you're the listing agent here, and you're selling that old, beautiful, classic, but newly remodeled home in Arcadia, and you're making your MLS. Yeah, you can say this is a beautiful home, recently remodeled, new appliances, near the schools, backyard, all those adjectives, those words that are correct, and that they're going to cause the buyer to be interested in this property. But be careful with things like, I had a case about the ad that says, is vacant land ready to build? Those open-ended statements of ready to build, those really should not be in your MLS, because it could be that there's a zoning restriction that you don't know about. There is a soil issue that you don't know about. I'm thinking of a vacant land case when I'm telling you about this, but those open-ended statements of ready to build, those are risky. The other, instead of saying ready to build, why not just say zoned R1? Zoned R1 in the city of Pasadena. And then you're telling the potential buyer, here's the zoning, and it's in the city of Pasadena. And then they can start doing their research with, city of Pasadena building department. I also had a case about a buyer. This was, getting into apartment buildings. So say you're the listing agent on that 20-unit apartment building. One of these buildings here, just outside the window, and I can see it in here in Alhambra. And you're making a comment. Maybe it's in an advertisement. Maybe it's just talking with the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent tells you that to purchase this building at 1.7 million, I really want the units to be vacant. I want to set the rent at my own price. I want to do some remodeling of them. Then I want to set the rent at a new price. And you say in an email to the buyer's agent, this building can be vacant within 6 months. So, in Los Angeles County and in most of the cities within the county, Los Angeles, Pasadena, Alhambra, Arcadia, there's rent control restrictions. So that's another situation I've seen come up, like ready to build. Another statement you want to stay away from is the building can be vacant within X time period, because chances are there are rent control restrictions which make it very difficult to evict tenants. You know, with the forms that you're going to use, that's another issue here that let's talk about today. On page one of my outline here, you all know about. Yes.
Can we go back to real quick where you say ready to build?
Mhm.
I mean, when you put something like, there's a possibility you can add to create more value. Would it be okay to put like, make sure you check with the city for feasibility or
So
that cover you?
So if let's say we're talking about an MLS. Yeah, your MLS, I'd like to see the
Verify.
zoning restriction status. So say it's R1, and then say check with city regarding building codes or building restrictions. But saying, possible to add more, that gets into more, risky comments. So you could say possible to add more, but then say after that, check with the city or check with the county.
Always
Yeah.
right next to it.
Yes.
Check for feasibility.
Yes. We all know about, the purchase agreement, the transfer disclosure statement, but know your forms. I always say that. The buyer's inspection advisory, that form, you giving that to the buyer, and that lays out the buyer's inspection responsibilities. So you don't have to explain the inspection responsibilities to the buyer yourself. You can say, well, here's the form that you use. In here, it says you have the right to, perform any kind of inspection, be it a soils inspection, be it a mold inspection, be it a plumbing inspection. The transfer disclosure statement, and one, lesser known form is the exempt seller disclosure statement. So if you're selling on behalf of an estate, if you're selling on behalf of a trust, this is the disclosure statement that you make, your seller makes. The full and typical TDS is not necessary. I've seen agents that think that the standard transfer disclosure statement is necessary where your seller's a trust. Usually with a trust, an estate, it's not actually the seller that's living in the property. Say, the parents passed away, dad passed away a year ago, it's in a trust now, the sons are selling. They don't live in the house. They may not have lived there for 20 years since they were children. So, I mean, should a family member selling on behalf of an estate, as a co-trustee, should they be completing the same transfer disclosure statement as me if I lived in my house for 12 years? I've done repairs. I know if the neighbor is noisy, or should they be held to, a lower standard? That's the way CAR and the California Civil Code has set it up, that there's a lower bar for a trustee, someone who sells for an estate, because they don't actually live in the property. So just know in those situations, the full TDS is not required. Another, common form that, you all know about is the agent visual inspection disclosure. And I don't need to tell you the details of that form, but one of the things with that form that I see is that agents use it to describe every single room, so that there's really no visual problems in the house. It's newly remodeled. There isn't a spot on the wall where there might be a leak. There isn't a crack in the floor. There isn't a stain on the carpet from the dog that was there for 5 years. So the house actually looks in suitable condition. There's no visual damage in the house that you can put on your Avid. Sometimes agents will just describe every room in the Avid. So the bedroom, it's, fresh white paint, new floors, you know, 2 French door windows with nice view. That's not truly the purpose of the Avid. And the risk for you is that when that after close of escrow, when that fresh paint has a bubble in it, and because in that wall that you certainly didn't know about, there's a leaking pipe, and it turns out that it's a more extensive problem than that, $500 fix, and there's a claim, your avid may be used by the buyer's attorney as some sort of representation or guarantee that everything's fine in that room. Well, the agent said it's, beautiful white paints on the walls and new carpeting, and that can be, turned against you as a representation that everything's okay. So why not in your avid, when you walk into that beautiful room, that freshly remodeled kitchen with that beautiful granite countertop, why not just say no visible damage or no issues noted? It's also just, simpler for you to complete. Along these lines, a listing agent and as a buyer's agent also, when you're doing that avid, and this could also apply to, emails you're writing, write up your descriptions without an inference or a suggestion of the cause or the source of a problem. So like I have here on my outline, it would not be wise to put on your avid typical cracks. To say, cracks in dining room floor. It would not be wise to put in your avid, master bedroom has minor stains on floor. Just say master bedroom has stains on floor. Because when you add these extra descriptions and you're well-intentioned, trying to provide information, but down the road, when your buyer is realizing that that minor remodel that was going to be $50,000 is actually going to be $200,000, they're going to be trying to recover that money from you and your broker, and that statement can be turned against you. And truly, we're not necessarily experts on what is a typical crack in a foundation, what's a minor stain. So just say crack in foundation of patio and leave it at that. With your disclosures that you're making as a listing agent, with information that you're providing to the buyer's side, you're allowed to rely on what your client tells you, your seller tells you, the property owner, unless there's some obvious red flags. So you're walking through the house on that first or second visit with your seller. You don't even have any offers yet. It's not an open house. And now you've handed a sample TDS to your seller, and they tell you, that guest bedroom, we had a great contractor. It was done with permits. You can reasonably rely on that. You're not required. Your function, we call it the standard of care. Your function does not require you to then say, I've got to confirm what my seller said and go to the county and pull those permits before he completes the transfer disclosure statement. No. Unless there's, what I say, a red flag, like maybe the seller says that guest bedroom, I did it myself and it took me only 2 weeks. That may be a red flag where you then have to tell your seller, well, did you pull permits for this? And then he says, no, I'm sorry, I did not. I used to be a contractor and my cousin's a handyman. We did it ourselves on the weekends. That would be a red flag. So when the seller is going through the TDS, and you then see that he checked, are you aware, you get that TDS and, it's right there on the second page about, unpermitted work. And then he checks no on that. Is there any unpermitted work? Your seller checks no. And then at that point, you would want to say to your seller, well, didn't you tell me that you and your cousin who's a handyman did this remodel? I don't think you should be checking no. And that conversation you want to put into email. But So that's a red flag situation, but the more common situation, you're walking through the house, the seller tells you, yeah, we had this contractor do the remodel 2 years ago, we got permits. You're good. You don't have to go checking things and worrying beyond that.
Can I ask you a question? This is Sylvia.
Sure, yes.
Hi. Okay, so if the seller tells you, I did it with permits, blah, 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 da, 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 and do you think it would be a good idea saying, do you mind if we have those handy, to make the buyers more at ease when they're trying to question us as your representative to see if we have anything available to prove it? Would you feel okay saying this question to the seller or not at all?
Yeah, I would be okay with that, sure, because your seller should have records for the property available. That includes permits. So if you learn that they had 1 year ago, these heavy rains that we're seeing. Now, I have more cases coming from the heavy rains. So, that there was a flood, there was the neighbor's house next door, there was drainage onto your property. That was an insurance claim. A mold remediation company had to come out. Yes, all those documents that were provided to farmers insurance for that water intrusion claim, all the reports you got from ServPro for mold remediation, those need to be handy. Those need to be available to the buyer. So documents on the background of the property would include permits. And your seller, if he has those should be handy. Now, do you need to tell your seller, go to the city now and get them, or go to the city's website? No. But if they are, something that he has on his computer, he has it in his file cabinet in his home office, he has it in the kitchen cabinet, then you should tell him, yeah, pull those documents out, because we may get some questions and you're required to provide those to the buyer.
Perfect. Thank you.
I also have a question going back to the exemption on the trust.
Yeah.
It's clear when you are the successor trustee and then you step up to dispose the property after the death of the original trustee.
Yes.
And you haven't been living in that property for 20 years, and
Right.
so you really don't have that obligation to disclose what happened to the house. But what if that you are the original trustee but rented out this property as a rental for the last 10 years? Are you exempt from it, or are you obligated to provide the TDS?
In that situation, good question. I would say in that situation, you should provide the standard TDS, because you have essentially acted as the owner. You've been the trustee for 10 years, 15 years. So although you haven't, slept in the property, if tenants have requested repairs. So in that situation, I would use the standard TDS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brian,
Sure.
can I ask you a question? We had a situation where our agent received a non-standard offer, which, on a purchase, for the purchase of a SFR.
Okay.
I personally would not want to do that, because Carr wrote those purchase agreements to protect both sides, right?
Yeah.
So in that situation, could she just counter and say, please, please submit on Carr form?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what
Yes. It is very unusual
Yes.
for an agent, for a buyer, especially if you have a buyer represented by, an agent.
Yes.
Let's say, maybe you had a buyer who somehow, again, it's a bad idea to represent yourself
Yeah.
without an agent. But if you have a buyer who's represented by a licensed California real estate agent, an offer, that's an excellent situation. It needs to be on the CAR form. It needs to be on the CAR purchase agreement, and the current CAR purchase agreement, because those are, yes, those have been drafted by real estate attorneys at CAR. They have been vetted, and they are mutually beneficial. There are terms that protect the seller, and there are terms that protect the buyer. So if you get that email with something that's just typed up on a Microsoft Word document as an offer, the response on behalf of your seller has to be, unfortunately, we're not able to respond to this offer in any way until it's submitted on a CAR form. And, you know, if you, you know, if regardless of how sweet the offer is, you know, if we think that we're going to be getting a good price for our seller, and that's a reason to accept an offer that's not on a CAR form, it's really not, you know, from someone who spends almost every day of every week dealing with these situations, it's just not, in the long run, a wise move. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that lately, like Redfin has left the California Association of Realtors. I don't know if that's in other states or in California, but are we gonna see that where more agents are gonna be submitting offers like that are not on par forms?
Yeah, I hope not. Right. And remember that, you know, you have your forms set up on software from your brokerage. You are, like I said at the start, you're acting under the license of your broker, under the supervision of your brokerage. So, it's, you know, essentially like acting in an unauthorized manner for your brokerage if you're using these forms, and you have to turn in your forms to your brokers. So not using CAR forms is a red flag. Yeah.
I think it's kind of sneaky.
Right, it is, right. So,
Some commercial transaction, they usually draft by.
you know, that's a good point, because my mindset in here is that most of you folks are working on residential sales. So, the caveat to this great discussion we've just had is that you'll see different types of forms in commercial and industrial properties. You will see, you know, AIR forms, on commercial properties. You may see, I'll call them, like, you know, privately, independently drafted forms. So my comments now are, you know, most pertinent to selling single family residences. Yes. And, you know, this also brings us to a good discussion here about the forms. Think about how you are providing your forms to your buyer or your seller. What I like to see is that you know, email a copy of the document just in your PDF file to your seller and say, hey, here's the offer that we received, take a look at it. You email the TDS to your buyer and say, here's the TDS that we received, take a look at it. If this is acceptable, I'm going to send it to you in DocuSign. I'm going to send it to you in the, you know, the electronic signature format. Counter offers, I've seen that happen also, that it's nice to send these documents in, you know, a non-DocuSign format first before you ask them to sign it. This could depend on the experience level of your buyer, the complexity of the form. Yes, but, you know, some people will feel, you know, a little confused or overwhelmed by the electronic signature programs. Usually it's DocuSign, where, you know, you click proceed and then it will take you to a place where it signs. I mean, the program allows you to scroll through it, but, you know, depending on the experience level, the age, the language, ability of your client, it is nice, and it's also in your best interest to protect you if you ask them, how would you like to receive documents? Do you want me to stop by your house? I'm going to email this to you first, take a look at it. Then if it looks good, I'm going to send it to you in the signature program. So I do see a lot of cases where the buyer says, well, it was just sent to me in DocuSign and it only opened up in this place where I could sign, and we had to remove contingencies the next day. My agent had texted me, are you ready to remove contingencies? And I just felt like I had to sign. So the more time you're giving your client to review these forms, and the more you're providing them in a format which is most suitable to them, you're ensuring a smooth transaction, and you're protecting yourself. we know, I mean, I have here the TDS, the SPQ, if you wanna, you know, for those of you who are here, if you wanna look at them with me after the presentation, that works too. I can do that. There's all the questions about, are you aware of, unpermitted work, environmental hazard, neighborhood nuisance, things like that, checking yes or no, explanations for yes or no. But, and this actually goes back to the question that I was asked a few minutes ago. It's more than checking yes or no, it's providing the relevant documents. So the end of the seller property questionnaire, it says, other reports, inspection disclosures, warranties, maintenance recommendations. And it says, if yes, provide any such documents in your possession to the buyer. So checking yes, there's been a water leak before. That's good. That's step one. But if there was a, ServPro came to the property, they do reports of pictures, you need to provide that also. If it was a more serious problem and you had a contractor come and provide some kind of report, any kind of document that you receive from the contractor, that should be provided also. Even simply an invoice that you received from the plumber, that should be in your file. And if you check the box that there's been previous plumbing problems at the property, then that should be provided also. This leads me into a discussion about so how much detail do you need to take this into? You're disclosing material facts. The standard for material is that it affects the value or desirability of the property. That's a broad statement. It is better to err on the side of caution, consider it to be a material fact, than not a material fact. I just had a mediation on a case about a week ago where the listing agent, she had a termite report. It was from approximately 1 year before the home was flipped. Her parents were the flippers. They were the contractors. She was the listing agent. And she had the report. So she called the termite company and said, this report is from 1 year ago. Is it still valid? Unbelievably, the termite company tells her these reports expire after 3 months, excuse me. So the agent then thinks she doesn't have to provide the termite report to the buyer. I wish she hadn't done that. I wish she had provided that. And, now her broker and her insurance company, they're going to have to pay, some money in settlement because she didn't provide the termite report. So these reports don't expire. There's no expiration date on a termite report, on a plumber's report, on a structural engineer's report. In this mediation that I was at about a week ago, the report was 1 year old. So yes, that is a report that should be provided. But what happens as you get more distance from the transaction? So a mold report from 3 years ago, is that material, should it be provided? I say yes, provide it. Again, all these rains, the soil sediments, you watch the news. This house in the hills of Hollywood slid off the hill. This house in the hills of Pasadena slid. Soil engineering reports, soils reports, those are especially important. So you have a soils report from 5 years ago. Should it be provided to the buyer? Yes. At what point do I start feeling more comfortable about reports may not be material? I use 10 years as the mark. I would not be comfortable. I would not be splitting hairs. Well, this report was 6 years ago. I would also look at what's the severity of the issue. So a plumbing report from 7 years ago, that gets into maybe it could be relevant or not. Maybe it's material or not, but the soils report from 7 years ago, yes. So if you want, you should consult your broker on these issues. Peter, you should talk to them about them. But if you're looking to have, more of a standard of when something becomes less relevant and doesn't need to be provided, I would use 10 years. Anything within 10 years, please provide it to the buyer.
So, if you're saying, if you help the client purchase a property and then they call you in 2-3 years and they're like, we're gonna sell this property and do an upgrade. Are you saying that, we should pull all the disclosures from the purchase and then give them down to the new buyer plus whatever disclosures they have now?
Good question. So let's say it was, I don't know, 3 years ago. The prior disclosures, I wouldn't provide those unless they're requested. But prior reports, I would provide. So a prior home inspection report, a prior mold report, I would provide those. If you have, during the time that the seller lived in the home, if there was a meaningful water intrusion issue and you have an invoice from the company that repaired it, I would provide that. You should have the prior disclosures, available, but you don't have to provide them unless they're requested. If they are requested, they should be provided. But let's change your.
What's the difference? Because if you have a termite report from the previous purchase, you have to provide them, but not the disclosure from the seller.
Right. So the difference that I'm drawing is here that you're providing disclosures yourself as to what you're aware of. So do you provide two sets? Here's the situation where I would provide 2 sets is the following. So your seller is, what we call a flipper. They buy the house and they immediately remodel, and let's say in 9 months, 10 months, in about a year, they sell it. They never live in the house, but they remodel, they put in new floors, they put in new AC, new roof, nice new countertops. They never live in it. And in, about that 1 year period, they put it back on the market, they sell it. So in that situation, I would have your seller's disclosures say, seller purchased house in, July 2023. Has never remodeled it and has never lived in the house. See previous disclosures. And then you can attach to the disclosure, just provide in the same email the previous disclosures that were provided. In a flipper situation, I would voluntarily provide the previous disclosures. As I think the situation you were talking about was buyer purchased the house, actually lives in it for a few years, and then resells it. They haven't done those quick remodels. In that situation, I would say it's not necessary to provide the previous disclosures. But I do think if you have a report, that should be provided. Yeah, like termite, right? Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I have a question, attorney.
Yes.
You say within 5 or 10 years, if there is a termite report that was kept by the seller,
Mhm.
and she had the termite report, but also they did a what do you call this thing?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you that well. What was it?
If there's a termite report that is material within 5 or 10 years, and she had a copy of that, but they also did a remedy. So we should have that report too, right? The remedy done on that.
Clarence.
Oh, clearance. Yes. So, if there's like a defect in the house and it's been repaired,
Correct.
that gets into a gray area. I would still provide the previous report. I would still check on your TDS that there's been a previous repair to the property on your SPQ. I mean, termite issues are more standard, so I'd be less concerned about termites. But if you've had a foundation issue, if you've had water intrusion in the house, you have to, check the proper box on the TDS and SPQ. I would then put in your explanation section, you know, put the year that happened. So in 2021, water intrusion in the downstairs bedroom, it was remedied by a contractor. Here is a copy of the invoices from the contractor. You can put that in your explanation section and then provide it to the buyer's agent.
How far back do they use
Thank you.
for?
Right. So,
I have a quick question. This is Camelia.
Oh.
The question is, if you fall out of escrow, but the buyer did an inspection and gave you the report, but they didn't give a request for repairs, but they just gave you the inspection report to say, hey, we're gonna cancel. Do you have to provide that to the next buyer?
good question. The best practice would be provided to the other buyer. And you know, you don't remember with providing these reports, you don't have to summarize them. You don't have to describe them. You don't have to give an opinion on them. All you have to do is say your email to the buyer's agent is say, here's a copy of the report that the previous buyer had done. Boom. That's it. It's not your job to point them to a specific page or to, you know, explain what's in the report. They have their own agent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if the buyer who back out the deal didn't provide you with the report, but then you knew that there was a report, do you have the obligation to have the buyer provide you the report?
No, you do not. It's what's in your possession, what you have. So correct. Yeah. Yeah. You have to have something in your file, you know, in an email to you, in a report that was provided, especially if you provide that report. But, you know, the buyer coming in and saying, I think the foundation is unstable, you know, just that in itself, you know, I don't think that has to be disclosed. And remember, every buyer has a duty to make their own investigation of the property. So, and with all of these issues, remember, you're communicating to your buyer, that so memorialize things in writing, in an email. I prefer email than text, but even in a text is better than not at all. So your buyer decides, I don't want to spend the money to perform to have the engineer examine or contractor examine the foundation. You know, it's better if that is in writing. If you're discussing this with your buyer by email, so if it's just in a phone call, it's possible later on there could be a claim, and then, you know, there's a question about why this inspection wasn't done. You know, another situation where I've seen this come up as to, you know, not communicating with your client in writing, just the conversation. And I have a case about this, where it's a 4-unit apartment building. It's in the South Bay, and seller and buyer, the agent's a dual agent. Their seller and buyer are, you know, negotiating over the price. The buyer then tells the seller, well, I'll sell it to you for, I'll pay 1.5 million, and I'm gonna pay you on the side another 200,000. But I'll just send you an email saying I'm buying appliances from you. So essentially, I'm gonna pay you 1.5 million under the purchase agreement. That's gonna be on the closing statement with escrow, but I'm gonna pay another 200,000 to you separately. I'm just gonna write you a check. I'm just gonna send you a wire, something like that. You know, it's an outside of escrow payment. Those should be avoided. The purchase price should be what's in the contract and what is in the escrow instructions and the closing statement. When you're getting into outside of escrow payments, you know, it gets into red flags, it gets into trouble. So in this situation, it turned out that the agreement was entered into, but then the buyer had the purchase price rate. I'm going to call it the contract price, but the buyer didn't follow through with making that other $200,000 payment outside of escrow. So the seller is saying, well, I need 1.7 million, but the contract only says 1.5. That wasn't in writing between the buyer and seller. Now, the agent, I'm defending the dual agent here, and this agreement, this conversation to provide the $200,000 outside of escrow payment, it took place in the yard, sirens of the property. The seller and buyer were standing there. The agent was there also. So she wasn't really offering this herself, but she heard it. And she's their agent, so she has a duty. It's a fiduciary duty to advise on what's the best course for the seller. So what she said to the seller is, that's between you. You shouldn't do this, Mr. Seller. That's just between you guys. I can't be a part of it. Okay, that's good. That's a good. The agent is correctly thinking here. Good. That's a good start, but that doesn't complete it for the agent, and that's why she's in this lawsuit that I'm defending her in, because there's nothing in writing. So in that situation, the agent, after that meeting well, first of all, the agent should say, Mr. Seller, you should not be accepting payments outside of escrow. I mean, it's almost like, a way of avoiding taxes. So he needs to use stronger words and say, don't do this, Mr. Seller. And then two, after visiting the property, the agent should put this "don't do this" in writing somehow to the seller. Maybe they're talking about how did the visit go. So the agent should say to a seller, hi, Mr. Seller, I just want to remind you that you should not be entering into an agreement to accept payments out of escrow. You'd be getting more money, but it leads to problems, and therefore I don't think you should do this. As agents, you don't want to be confrontational with your clients. So you want to, present it in a friendly manner. You're not looking to start a fight with an argument with your seller, but you should have something in writing. If you can put it in an email, that's even best. So, say they're doing that inspection, and then 2 days later, 3 days later, report comes in, and you get a copy of it. You're sending it over to your seller. Hi, I just wanted to give you a copy of this appraisal. As we discussed at the inspection, I know that buyer is offering $200,000 as an outside of escrow payment, but that's not a good idea, and you should not agree to outside of escrow payments. So that's an example of current situation I'm dealing with where, the agent was on the right track. She knew it was a red flag, but she had to, use stronger words and have something in writing, because
So if she had an email, that kind of covered.
yes, yeah, it would have made it, easier to defend. Emails are great if in a text is okay too. It can be a little, text is better than nothing. Yeah. Okay. So.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a little more sensitive issue too. Now, if the seller pays the buyer a referral fee, even inside escrow, that would be some problem too. If the referral fee is substantial, for example, $200,000 or $300,000 for referral fees, wouldn't you think?
Yes, and that brings me to another issue. I want to talk with you about. It's in my outline also towards the end as a fiduciary. Remember, you're a fiduciary, and let me scroll down in the outline to. Okay, so I've got this as section 5.4, excuse me, in my outline, breach of fiduciary duty. So you are a listing agent or you're a buyer's agent. You are a fiduciary to them, and the fiduciary duty, it's the highest duty that, it comes from that Latin word for, the high, for, honor and integrity. It's the highest level of a duty, the highest standard which the law imposes on anyone. It's even, the same duty that, a doctor or a lawyer has. to their client. So as the fiduciary, you, and this getting into the question of fees and compensation, anything that you earn on this transaction has to be known to your client or disclosed to your client in writing. So let's say that, again, you're dealing with a flipper. Well, here, actually, here's the first example. You are the listing agent. Let's say you could be dual agent, and you're selling one of those apartment buildings. I can see it outside the window here. One of those apartment buildings here in Alhambra. You're selling it, and the buyer is it's an LLC, could be a partnership. It's some kind of business entity, we call it. And you're the listing agent. You could, maybe you're a dual agent, maybe the buyer is independently represented with their own agent, but you are also a member of that LLC. So you are a 30% member of the LLC. So you are the listing agent, but you're also essentially the buyer also, because you have an ownership interest in the buyer. So your duty to the seller is to get the best price possible, right? But you're actually a partial owner of the entity of the buyer, and therefore you also want the lowest price possible. So you have a conflicting position. In that situation, and maybe you don't even get into that situation. That's one way of dealing with it. But any compensation and any financial interest that you have in the transaction, your client, who you owe the fiduciary duty, has to know about that. So in that situation, as listing agent, you need to tell your client in an email, I'm representing you, but I want you to know that I am also a 10% owner in the Smith LLC that is going to be the buyer of this property. Another situation would be getting into Peter's example. So you're selling, your home in Arcadia, and maybe it's an older home. It's an elderly person who is living in the home. Lived there for 40 years, and now they want to go live with their children in their old age. And you're selling it to someone who remodels and resells, someone who's a flipper. They do this all the time. So they tell you, well, if you're the listing agent, and let's say you're dual agent also. So if this transaction goes through, I will also pay you separately a $5,000 bonus. Okay. So again, that's a financial benefit that you're receiving, and that's something that you need to tell your seller about, because arguably that could affect your judgment. I mean, I hope it wouldn't, but if there's that financial incentive from the buyer, then possibly you're going to tell your seller, hey, we're at 1.4, let's counter at 1.35, and that will get the deal done. So but maybe you shouldn't negotiate it harder for your seller, but you have this incentive to keep the buyer happy because you're going to get this, let's call it a referral fee. In that situation, that also needs to be disclosed to the buyers. So the guiding principle in simple terms in this situation is that anything that you earn, any funds that go into your pocket from this transaction, need to be disclosed in writing to your client. And, that means it needs to be, in the settlement statement, in the commission instructions, those documents, those governing documents in escrow. Any penny that you earn needs to be, in those documents. I mean, the buyer could buy you lunch. Okay, that wouldn't have to be disclosed. But the buyer is going to give you a referral fee. Let's say it's only $1,000. Oh, it's only $1,000. No, it should still be disclosed to your seller. Okay.
I have a question, Tony Brian.
Yes.
Jeffrey. Let's say I'm a listing agent of representing the seller with one for sale home, and here comes the buyer. he doesn't have any BRBC or a buyer's agent. He comes to the open house and said, "Hey, Mr. Arbit, I don't have any agent. Can you I want to buy. I'm interested in buying this property. Can you represent me?"
Mhm.
Being dual agency, I'm talking about this dual agency. How can I protect myself to of course, some listing agent would like to have to earn the full commission, whatever it is, right?
Right, well,
In terms of dual agency.
yeah, use the dual agency disclosure form. This goes back to using those CAR forms. There is a form precisely for that purchase. So use the dual agency disclosure form. And provide it before. Agency disclosure has to be done before you make the offer. So I think everybody would know, use the dual agency disclosure form. But what if you here's what could happen. You say, well, let's just submit the offer, see if the seller accepts it. Then I'll make the dual agency disclosure. That's something that maybe an agent might think, well, okay, let's submit the offer, see if it's accepted, and then I'll do my dual agency disclosure form. The agency disclosure form should be made before the offer is submitted. Let me check on my outline here a couple more topics, because I think I'm at an hour, but I will stay longer and take questions and then talk with you all more about these issues. But just a couple other things I wanted to highlight here for you. Okay, so investigation responsibilities, that's an important issue. Let's say and this comes up a lot. I've had numerous cases about this. So you're the buyer's agent, they're buying a house. I had this in a case with vacant land, and buyer says, I want to buy this house and I want to build, it's on a hill, so it's in the hills here of Arcadia or Pasadena. I want to build a deck on the hillside, and there I want to put in, my fire pit, my sound system. I want to build this great new deck on the backyard. I'm not really sure if the city will let me build this deck. Can I do that? And you're my agent, go check that out for me at the city. Let me know if the city will allow me to do that. And you're trying to serve your client, you're trying to make a sale. So you feel like, yeah, I'm gonna go check. You then text back or you email and say, I'll check it out with the city tomorrow and I'll get back to you. That situation creates problems. So in that situation, here's what I would do. I would tell them, you may need a permit to build here, to determine the building restrictions, or it may be zoned that you can't build on this hillside. There may be a building restriction on the hillside here. Here's the website of the city of Arcadia. I'd suggest that you review it for building restrictions that may apply. I would recommend that you pull building permits for this property. Another thing that I would do in this situation is I would say, here's the name of a contractor. I think that you should walk this property with a contractor before you remove your contingencies. And the contractor can better advise you about the ability to build this deck on the hillside. So referring the buyer to the city, referring to the buyer to the contractor is the better way to handle it, rather than assuming the responsibility of researching permits yourself. Let's say that, you're friends with this buyer, want to make the sale. Your buyer says, well, you're my agent, I thought you were supposed to do that. Here, you could say, well, here's what you could do. Why don't you make an appointment at the city of Arcadia and the building and safety office? And if you want to go to the building and safety office, I will go with you. But as the real estate agent, you should not be going to the building department at the city of Arcadia yourself. So maybe your buyer's a little more pushy. They really do want you to help. Maybe your buyer really isn't that experienced in this and they really do need some help. You can say, well, okay, why don't you call the city? If you can get someone on the phone from the city to talk about this, you can conference me in. Okay, why don't you review the city's website? Then they call you. I reviewed the city's website. I didn't get that much information from it, but I see that they have a public counter, a public desk that is open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'm going to go down there. Would you, as my real estate agent, go with me? I think in that situation, you can say, yeah, I will go with you to the city. Keep in mind, I can't explain this to you yourself, but I will accompany with you. I will accompany you to the city so you can ask questions. Because, I had a case where the agent called the planning department himself, and then he told his buyer, well, the planning department says that you can build here, but you may need a biological survey for endangered species. So his words were twisted into this was a guarantee that you can build here. So with investigations, keep in mind that the buyer performs investigations. Show them the buyer's inspection advisory. Point them in the right direction. Give them the website of permitcheck.com. Give them the website of the city of Arcadia. Give them the name of your friend from high school who now is a contractor, but don't take on that responsibility yourself. You would really be becoming a land use attorney if you're doing that. I think I've gone over an hour. I've covered part of my outline. I always get questions. I mean, I like to talk with you folks and get your questions even more than reading the outline. So I'm going to, just open it up for questions or any more discussions that you may have. At this point, I'm happy to, keep chatting with anyone online or anyone who's here in person. And even if you're here, if you didn't get the hard copy of the outline, I have more copies here in the front. So.
Question. So, I'm working on a trust sale and, there are two co-trustees and they each have an attorney because they're not getting along, so they each, speak to their attorneys. So,
Right.
One of the co-trustees says, I'm gonna have my attorney contact you and I give you permission to speak to her. What should I be careful about when I speak to her? She says, I give you authorization to speak on anything having to do with the property. So
Okay.
I don't know what she's gonna ask me,
Yeah.
or if she's gonna ask me anything. Is there anything that
So-
obviously I'm not taking any sides,
Right.
but I'm thinking she's gonna ask like, what is your professional opinion on this? And is there anything that I should maybe be, careful about talking?
Right. Well, if it's an attorney, I mean, as the trustee, we're assuming that person's in the capacity under the trust to be the trustee. So like that's off the table. We see situations where there's a dispute as to actually who is the trustee. So I think that's off the table here. In this situation, be careful about offering opinions about, like development of the property, like, you can give an opinion about what a range that it would sell for, but when you're giving opinions on sale value, have something that backs it up. So, look at comparables in the area. I mean, maybe if you've signed the listing agreement, you've already done that, but,
I
so,
think it's more about mismanagement, like
About
one feels the other one is mismanaged.
right, I
I
see.
think that's what the question is.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
it's.
not a property manager.
Right, okay, good. That's the first start, yeah. I mean, is it a rental property?
It's
Is
a
it-
rental property.
Okay.
Actually, one of the co-trustees has a child living in one of the units, so that's another thing. They're
Right.
they're saying that as a co-trustee, he has, interest in their
Okay.
son's living there.
Right, so it sounds like the property is owned by a trust, there's two co-trustees, but they don't get along, and they each have lawyers, so your duty is to the trust. Your duty is not to one trustee over the other, so you need to be like, just like you said, not take sides between the two trustees. Because if they're co-trustees, they're essentially like partners that own this property equally. So just as you already kind of figured it out, don't take sides between the two trustees.
I think they want to know, like, okay, what is the value of this person if the child wasn't living there? Like, if this, the co-trustee's son wasn't living there, would we get more value? So they want to kick him out. And I think they're trying to get me to say, oh yeah, I think it would sell for, $800,000 more if he was living there. So I'm thinking
Okay.
that's what it is. but-
So like if he moved out, maybe they would just put it on the market, it would rent it. Maybe they're giving the family member below market rent. And if he wasn't there, then they would rent it at higher value. So, do your online research before.
I can
Have,
give them a range of what I think, like my professional.
I mean, you could do that. You can, no,
I
you.
mean, we can't predict what would
You
happen.
you can give an opinion on what this unit would rent for. Just have some basis for it. Have done your Google search or Zillow search online, and buildings like this in this neighborhood, they're selling at this. The typical rent in this neighborhood is, 1,500 a unit. So it's okay to give those opinions, but keep them neutral and keep them based on things that you've found. That you did some research or you talked with other agents. Like, there's a building down the street and you see it's up for listing. So call that agent. I mean, you're not submitting an offer, but just chat with that agent. Say, what's it going for? Have you gotten offers? So just to keep your duty of impartiality, I know you wouldn't, but don't give an opinion of like, well, oh yeah, if the co-trustee's son wasn't here, it would rent for some, wonderful astronomical price. So that's our motive to get rid of him. No,
No.
right.
But I mean, I could speak on to like my relation, like what my experience has been with the tenant there. Like, he hasn't been very,
He hasn't been cooperative, yeah.
or like when people have come to see the property, he
Yeah.
hasn't been very
Okay.
nice to them.
Yeah, I mean,
Cooperative, but he hasn't been very.
that's really a situation where, I mean, that's really more of a problem for the trustee. So the trustee, if it's his or her son, that
Is that a
sound,
conflict of interest?
it's like, yes, it's like a conflict of interest by the trustee to the trust, because each trustee owes a duty to the trust, not to his or her personal interest. So, my simple comments for you are to be neutral, not favor one trustee over the other. And, if you're offering those opinions on value, have some documents you found, some online research to back it up. Okay,
So, Brian, I know that, you have a lot of material to cover today, and according to you,
right.
your handout, some of the interesting topics like fraud and misrepresentation and that kind of things, you haven't really covered too much. I was wondering if we can have a follow-up, seminar on.
We could, sure.
Maybe, another, session.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah,
Would that be okay?
that would be fine. Of course, right. Yes. Yeah, no, there's more topics I could cover with you, and yeah, we could schedule a follow-up session. Sure.
Do you only represent agents, or do you do real estate law? Like if a client wanted a real estate attorney, do you do that too?
It's mostly defending real estate agents. Yeah.
Okay,
Usually, it's through, so remember, if an agent makes a mistake, the agent is sued. But the responsibility or the liability flows to the broker. So it becomes the broker's problem, and then your broker has insurance. And that's, typically the way I get involved. Yeah. Okay, so anyone online have any other questions? I think I'll sign off soon, but if anyone online has a question, go for it. I can still talk with you.
Anthony, Brian.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. It's always wonderful to be with you, and I'll come back soon. Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Brian.
much.